So welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, and it's great to see you all. We're living in some difficult times, and I think our being able to come together every month and be in fellowship with each other is just so critically important, and we really need to be together and supporting each other and joining together, as Lisa likes to say, being together in the choir and making sure that we're all singing together. And just want to remind us all that we're staying in a nonpartisan space, as difficult as sometimes that is, but we're all working together to bend the arc toward justice. So I am going to ask Reverend Joseph Jackson, the President of MICAH, to start us off with some words of wisdom.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I want to share with us this evening a meditation from Barbara Holmes, who is an activist, a spiritual teacher, writer, scholar, who focuses on African-American spirituality, mysticism, cosmology, and culture, and is preferenced by a brief preference by Richard Rohr. And so it says that a contemplative person is someone who knows that they don't know everything and trust that they are being helped by something much larger, wiser, and more loving than themselves. It is these very qualities that enable them to act on behalf of others and communities in need. Barbara Holmes offers some insights as to how and why this is true, particularly in moments of crises. And I'm just going to share a few excerpts from her meditation. It reads that the world is the cloister of the contemplative. There's no escape. Always the quest for justice draws one deeply into the heart of God. In this sacred interiority, contemplation becomes the language of prayer and the impetus for prophetic proclamation and action. Contemplation plugs the supplicant into the catalytic center of God's Spirit, into the divine power that permeates every aspect of life. In this space, there are no false dichotomies, no divisions between the sacred and the secular. Though or through acts of contemplation, individuals and congregations enter into the liminal space where the impossible becomes possible. As with all great social justice movements, there came a time, in parentheses, in the civil rights movement, when worship practices and communal resolve coalesced and an interfaith, interdenominational, interracial community formed. The commonality for this dissenting community was the willingness to resist the power of apartheid in the Americas with their bodies. The formation of community during the civil rights movement was quintessential coming-of-age story for Africana people during a particular time in history. Nonviolent initiatives seeded with contemplative worship practices became acts of public theology and activism. Activism and contemplation are not functional opposites. Rather, contemplation is at its heart a reflective activity that is always seeking the spiritual balance between individual piety and communal justice seeking. Who could have predicted that America's apartheid would fall as decisively as the walls of Jericho when the people marched around the bastions of power carrying little more than their faith and resolve? How audacious it is to take what is giving, the remnants of a shadow community, the vague memories of Mother Africa, and a desperate need to be free and translate those wisps into a multicultural, multivalent, liberative vision of community. The idea of a beloved community emerged from the deeply contemplative activities of a besieged people. In closing, as individuals and communities, we can respond with justice and compassion, or we can double down on the pursuit of accumulation and power with no more than a
If you want to mute Pastor
You
Jackson.
muted yourself?
Sorry, Reverend Jackson, you got muted accidentally. Sorry.
how much did I, when did I get muted?
Just a couple words.
Oh, okay, probably the
Last
closing.
sentence, maybe.
Probably the closing, okay. As individuals and communities, we can respond with justice and compassion, or we can double down on the pursuit of accumulation and power with no more than a return to business as usual. With that, I want to offer this prayer. Oh, great love, thank you for living and loving in us and through us. May all that we do flow from our deep connection with you and all beings. Help us become a community that vulnerably shares each other's burdens and the weight of glory. Listen to our hearts' longings for the healing of our world, knowing you are hearing us better than we are speaking. We offer these prayers in all the holy names of God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I want to turn it over to Lisa Jones from MICAH to introduce our amazing speaker.
All right, thank you, Rabbi Bonnie, and thank you, Pastor Jackson, for that great reflection to lead in to where we are. I know that there's been a lot going on in the world, and of course with the Supreme Court, lots of different things. And so number of different cases that have been going on, and then other things. And then of course we have the January 6th insurrection hearings that are going on. So there's a lot before us as people of faith and standing strong on our justice values. So I want to introduce Pastor Ellwanger. Pastor Ellwanger, I've known Pastor Ellwanger actually before I even came to MICAH. I met you actually, Pastor Ellwanger, in 2017. I'm trying to remember if it was when we were starting to, something else I was involved with the Close MSDF campaign, but around the criminal legal system and closing down that prison and reducing that prison population. That's when I had met you, and I know you wrote a book talking about your time that you were in Selma and as a Lutheran pastor, just some of the things that you went through, and then also to walking with Dr. King, and how unique that is to hear clergy at that time, particularly white clergy at that time, just what you needed to do to stand strong in the value for justice for all. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you have done, and Pastor Ellwanger serves really as kind of a guiding light of where we need to be for our justice values and staying strong. And I want to just introduce him to us. And so he's one of the founders of MICAH, and has a history of also doing a lot of work in wisdom and getting wisdom created also too. So I will let Pastor Ellwanger really talk to things from his perspective of really, we are dealing with very chaotic times. And, let him give his perspective as to why we need to be steadfast and consistent and not let up and not be discouraged of the things that are before us. So I will let him tell his story and to bring those values of why he keeps doing what he does, even at this stage in his life. Pastor Ellwanger, I see you on the screen, and I see your lovely wife, Joyce Ellwanger, who's been there also too in the fight for justice with you. So I turn it over to you to give us your perspective in why we should stay steadfast in this work. Pastor Ellwanger?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Pastor Joe Jackson, my brother, who, as president of MICAH, walks the walk. He was at the vigil today in front of the Cheney Center, and he's there almost every Tuesday as we seek to save restorative justice where it appears in the Department of Corrections, because it's it's almost a rare reality where it does appear, and here it is in Cheney Center. So thank you, Pastor Joe and Brother Joe, and I hope that I live up to the expectations here. I know that I am definitely preaching to the choir. I'm talking to people almost, as I look at the screen, I see the veterans that have been walking this walk for years and years and years. And you all have something to share with us and to give with us. I must say that I was gifted and graced by God. I really truly wish that every white pastor in this country had the opportunity that I did to be called, my first call as pastor of an African-American congregation in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s. And it is definitely an experience that has changed my course and my faith life and my actions all through my life as a pastor. Fortunately, Lisa knows that I tend to keep, and others on the screen know that I tend to keep going. So she gave me 5 questions that I should keep in mind as I share with you some of the learnings that I have experienced and gained over the years. And so Lisa's first question is, what motivated you to participate in the civil rights movement? Now, I could spend the entire 20 minutes on that one, but let me just say very quickly that number one, I came to my first call in an African-American congregation in Birmingham, Alabama in 1958 with a stirring of the spirit inside me. During my seminary days, having grown up in Selma, Alabama, I was deeply troubled as I saw the inequalities and the impact of the benign, in quotation marks, Jim Crow policies of the South. And so I even wrote my Bachelor of Divinity thesis on racial integration and the Lutheran Church in the South. And I tried to show where the Lutheran Church was, and it wasn't in a very good spot, and where it ought to be. But you can see I was troubled deeply about the inequities and the injustices. And a little footnote here is that this is obviously critical to anyone who's going to stay the course in doing justice. We have to be deeply concerned about the injustices. We have to see them and they have to trouble us. And so that was the first thing that got me ready to join the civil rights movement. Secondly, just being in that African-American congregation, living in the African-American community, I considered, I could have said no to the civil rights movement, as almost all white pastors and many Black pastors did. But I felt that walking with the people that I walked with and not participating in lifting the burdens that were on the backs of every one of them would have been a complete dishonest walk as a pastor in that community. And so there was that pull from walking in that community that said, I can't possibly say no to the civil rights movement. Thirdly, I really saw the integrity of the leaders of this movement. Believe me, there were many, almost all the white folks in the South and a whole lot of Black folks question the integrity of Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, Fred Shuttlesworth, the leaders of the movement. There were huge billboards in the South calling Dr. King a stoop for the communist movement. And so there were folks who said these folks are just working for the communists. And then there were others who said that they were buffoons, clowns, out there on the stage of the theater of the world, strutting their strut for their own personal gain of having their name in the paper. But I saw something very, very different. I saw the commitment of each one of these persons laying their lives on the line, and that drew me into the civil rights movement. And I must say that there was, almost in the story that we all have, there's one or two people that were messengers that really put you on the spot. There was Adini Drew, one of the leaders in Birmingham in 1963 in the movement, who came to me and said, we would like for you to serve on the central committee of the movement as we carry out the demonstrations in Birmingham in 1963. Well, that meant that we would be meeting at the A.G. Gaston Motel, which was the Black motel that was under 24/7 surveillance by the police. And everybody who went in there and met with Dr. King had their name on the police blotter. And so it wasn't exactly like going to a church for a committee meeting. It was really signing up for the civil rights movement. But I saw the integrity of Adini Drew and had, of course, an experience of a lifetime in having these meetings with Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and Fred Shuttlesworth, and the leaders who definitely were putting themselves on the line for justice. And when it comes to the participation in Selma and leading the march on the day before, it turned out to be the day before Bloody Sunday, of the concerned white citizens of Alabama, it so happened that I was president of the Birmingham Council on Human Relations, which was the only racially integrated group in Birmingham. And we were the ones planning this statewide march in Selma to stand in solidarity with the voting rights movement that was going on. And so who should be chosen and asked to serve as the leader of the march? Of course, the president of the Birmingham Council on Human Relations. So once again, I had the opportunity to say yes or no, and I felt that I had to say yes. And this really catapulted me into an even deeper walk then with the movement. And it's still with me to this day. Well, enough on question number one. Question number two. How do you compare the work today with the work of the 60s? Well, I think you've heard this comparison, and it's very true, that the injustices of the situation in the Jim Crow period in the South and the reaction of the police and the power structure to the civil rights movement was in your face. You know, it was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. It was the batting down the marchers over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was my timekeeper says 10 minutes are up already. But it was Sheriff Jim Clark who was saying to the people coming to register to vote, not today, come back next week. This was in your face. The injustice was so obvious and so clear, and it was laced, the North discovered and the Congress discovered, it was laced with hatred. It wasn't just a benign kind of response. And that clearly was something in your face, whereas today, the injustice issues are very similar, but are more subtle. The big issues in that day, jobs were the big issue in our Birmingham demonstrations, and voting rights in Selma. Those two issues are still on the table as issues. And if we do not see that, we are blind. There are those who look at the unemployment rate of 3% and say, oh, everybody who wants to work can work. And everybody who wants a family supporting job can have it today. The job market is hot. Well, you don't live in Milwaukee or in a few other places where there are spots of unemployment that are as high as 25%. Granted, they're not necessarily all people who are ready to line up for a job because they've been discouraged again and again, and they have obstacles and impediments. But that's part of the injustice, and the result of the injustices that we need to work at. And look at the voting situation. We have to call voter suppression for what it is. It is not a partisan issue, although there's certainly certain people on one side or the other that are pushing voter suppression. And the latest decision here in Wisconsin, of course, by our own Supreme Court is an example. But the reality is that there are people disenfranchised today, not the least of which are the folks who are out of prison, in the community, working, paying taxes, and cannot vote for 10, 20 years. Our own Sylvester Jackson, who is co-chair of our Prison Reform Task Force in MICAH, will not be able, if we don't get things changed, will not be able to vote for another 10 years. Now that is absolutely unjust, and it's an issue that has to be worked at. But you see, the issues are very, very similar. It's just that they're a little more subtle, and we have to know how to get at them and to share the job of working at the justice that is necessary. A third question is the question yeah. We'll get at it here. Here we are. The greatest challenge to staying the course. What was the greatest challenge to you for staying the course? Well, I certainly must have to say that I never had any major blip in my walk for justice. I always had that churning in my gut and in my soul. And I always had someone at my side, to say nothing of co-workers and colleagues that kept encouraging, reminding me that there's work to do, and you've got some gifts that need to be shared with that work. So I never had any really serious impediments and obstacles. There certainly are some discouragements, some things that discourage me even to this day, and disappoint me, I guess might be the better way of putting it. And I look, for instance, at the faith community, my own denomination, and look at the number of pastors and people and congregations that are really into justice work and get it, that this is part of what it means to walk in faith. And for Christians, it's part of what it means to live the gospel. And yet they don't get it. That is discouraging, to say the least. It's certainly discouraging to see that there are congregations, even where there are some strong justice leaders, that do not have what we in the Gamaliel network call a core committee, a core justice team within the congregation. So you've got more than one or two people leading the charge. You've got a committee that looks at the local community, looks at the local area, and looks at the national issues and says, keeps the congregation fired up for seeing what needs to be done and then doing it. That the congregations find it so difficult to form and shape and galvanize a group of people to really work at justice is disappointing, to say the least. I think I need to move on to question number 4, which is question number 4. Why should we stay the course and not give up and even be discouraged? Well, number 1, it's who we are as people of faith. It's not a kind of option to work for justice. It's who we are. As Micah, the prophet, says, what does God require of you, O man, but to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God? So when we see this as part of who we are as God's called persons, we can't give up. when we look at the people on whose shoulders we stand, and look at the people who fought and worked for the abolition of slavery, and then for women's suffrage, and all of these justice issues, sometimes working for 2 or 3 generations. It's on their shoulders that we stand, and we cannot just shrug our shoulders and say, you worked, you got the ground ready for more justice work, but we don't have time for it, we don't have energy for it. Can't happen. Can't happen. And then also, we definitely have people that I think most of us have somebody in mind that we know embodies the injustice, the impact of injustice. And this helps to keep us moving forward. Injustice is not just an intellectual concept to be batted around. It's a reality that impacts people. I begin my personal meditation every day, remembering in my mind Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins. Those are the 4 girls killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. I was a liturgist at the funeral for 3 of the 4. I stood at the graveside of Denise McNair and did the committal service, and remembering them each day reminds me that the forces of white supremacy, the forces of racism are real and they're brutal. And we have got to do something. So I think that brings me to the last question, which is, what gives you hope? Well, I must say that as I look around Wisconsin and look at the 8 places where I worked after my retirement in 2002 to start up congregation-based justice organizing groups, 7 of those places still have organizations functioning and people working for justice. And that gives me hope that there are people in every place, every town, every city, every hamlet who are ready to work for justice, but they need to be called. What gives me hope? Certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, the young people that are stepping up to the plate, the leaders igniting transformation, a youth-led group that started in Milwaukee. I understand it's going statewide. And Expo, which is formerly incarcerated persons, turning around now and very serious about bringing about change. All of this shows to me and gives to me hope that the younger generation is getting it, and the people impacted are getting it, and by the grace of God, they will help us through. And so I pray that each one of us may indeed think about the deep motivation that is there, that's brought us this far, and by the grace of God will carry you all the way to stay the course for justice and for people. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Pastor Ellwanger, for that. Just letting us know why we should stay the course, because I think in these times right now, we need to be reminded of our history, of the history of this justice work, and why we need to keep going on. I keep telling folks that if we want to change things for our grandchildren, we have to stay the course. And so I'm so grateful that you were able to give that that wonderful message for us, and to be a guiding light and an example that justice gets passed on from generation to generation. And our call is to stay the course as faith people of goodwill in all of our faith traditions. So we're going to be going into our breakout groups, and this is the question I would like to have us really talk about. And so we'll have a few minutes. David will put us in breakout groups shortly. But what inspired you about Reverend Ellwanger's talk? What keeps you in this fight? So what keeps you in this fight? And how will you be able to take that back to your own community and continue to do that fight? So David, I turn it over to you, and so that we can go into our small groups. Say, why don't we just talk about, and we can put some ideas, you know, in the chat, but let's talk about you know, what we heard, and let's keep some of the things of what we heard, and we'll save the chat. Just put some of the ideas of what you heard, and that and why we needed this tonight to take with us, so that we can fuel ourselves and not stay in a hopeless place. So I'll let you start putting that in the chat, and I'll start reading some of them off. Concrete hope. Being aware that other people are working and caring. Community. This is community right here on this screen. We are community. This is who we are. We cannot sit back feeling hopeless. Remembering that this is a multi-generational effort. Oh, white supremacy tells us we want quick fixes. There's not such thing as quick fixes. You want to do it, we got to do for the long haul and pass on. There is strength in numbers, and iron sharpens iron. Local action makes a big difference. Local elections make a real big difference too. Voting is power. Great. I want better for my kids. It is always the right time to do the right thing. We need to make good trouble. I have big shoulders that I am blessed to be standing on. This effort or ineffort affects real people. Be human first. Find the humanity in others. Our faith empowers us. Making it part of our core identity so we cannot do otherwise. Great comments. Never stop working. We can rest, but never stop. Stay connected and encourage one another. And I also have a question for you also too. Reminder, you need to bring people with you. So who's going to replace you when you cannot do this work or you don't have the capacity? Who's your replacement that you're training up? Remember, this is multi-generational work. Can't just be you, then we're just activists. Who are you training to replace yourself? We must do this work to be people of integrity.
Yes.
Lots of great comments. And I appreciate all of you. And this is why we do the work. This is why we keep meeting monthly, because we need to be connected together to know that there are other faith folks
Yes.
that share the same values, whether we are different religions or if there are people on this call who are not faith people, but we have faith and justice values. We are connected together. We are going to bind together and we're going to stay together. We are not going to let white supremacy divide us. We're going to stand on our justice values that God has called us to do.
Amen.
All right, I'm going to turn it now over to David.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, very much. And thank you, everybody. I think our theme tonight is that we're in this for the long haul. We're in this for longer than any of us are in this by ourselves. So I want to just kind of start by just kind of crowing a little bit about kind of a good action that we had today over in Madison. I was actually very pleased. The pastors, Joe and Joyce, well, they were down, they had to go down to the Cheney Center today and yell and scream without their microphone because they lent the microphone to some others of us who went over to Madison today because we had an action to call on the governor to appoint a new chair for the parole commission. It's a long, complicated issue, but you know, essentially the long and short of it is, in this election year, the Republican candidates decided to play politics and start claiming that Governor Evers was soft on crime because he was letting all these people out of prison. And Governor Evers, instead of sort of standing up for himself, fired the chair of the parole commission so that nobody else can get let out of prison. And these are people, we're talking about a group of people who've been in prison by definition for more than 22 years, who are eligible for parole because those were the rules back in the days. So I was so proud of our group today. And Sherry, who's on this call, can back me up. She was there. She was one of the planners of this. But we have some people, Beverly Walker, who's one of our leaders, has been at this since her husband was trapped, was eligible for parole and couldn't get released. And she kind of helped to form a group of people to fight for people who are parole eligible. And the thing that struck me is they must have started at least 10 years ago working on this. And they actually had some steps forward and now there was this big step back. But what struck me is there was a group of people that was ready to respond. They were there, they hung in there through, you know, this is definitely not a cool issue. This is not the sort of thing that pops up in the news all the time. These are really forgotten people that they're advocating for. But they kind of stuck together. They hung together. They looked for their chance. And they got, hey, if you get Spectrum One News, look for us. Spectrum One was there and both of the Madison TV stations, the AP, who knows who else. The only point that I want to make is this was kind of pulled together and carried out mostly by people who used to be in prison, were themselves paroled, or people who are family members of people who are seeking parole, who really made a commitment to each other and to sticking together and to making sure that this was kept alive. And today they just did a great job and I think had a little breakthrough. So I want to kind of lift that up, partly because I'm kind of on a little bit of a high because of it. But I also want to think about what Pastor Joe was talking about with core teams. You know, that everybody should have a team. This is really way too hard of work to do by yourself. And I think, and Lisa just challenged us now to say, let's think of who else we can bring. Who else can we form a team with? Who can we form a community with? We have one big opportunity. We'll be sending you out specifics on it. I know a bunch of you have done these already, but we have a 5-week Zoom leadership training thing, kind of a community organizing training. It's every Thursday night, starting on August 25th up until September 22nd. It's for an hour and a half. It's basically this kind of time slot. It's actually a little late. It's like 6:30 to 8. And basically it's to really work on your skills and your ability to build your own team, to kind of reach out, to form another group of people around you, to bring more people into the movement and to keep them involved so that we're ready. When something happens, we don't have to start from scratch all the time. We're ready. We've got our team. We're in place. When something happens like the Felmers Cheney Center, the MICAH folks are ready to go. They were ready to jump right on that issue. When this thing came up about parole, that old law parole group was there. They were ready to go. That's what we really want to stress with this training, is that we keep this group together, but then we all see, how do we build our own teams? How do we build our own core teams? Because we need a lot of people in this movement, and we need people in every place. We need people from every demographic. We need people who are willing to go. We need people of different ages, different races, different everything. We just all need to be there. And it's really incumbent on us, who've kind of, I hope picked up some of Pastor Joe's like abiding passion for justice, to say, how am I going to build the team that's going to extend the work that I'm doing beyond me? How can I build the team that's going to make sure this keeps going when I'm not here? So if you can, and if you're saying to yourself, I already did the training, I checked that off my list. No, if you already did the training, you should know I need to invite 2 or 3 people who are potential team members of mine to go to that training so that they get it too, so that they understand what we're talking about with this organizing stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's just what I wanted to leave with you. August 25th to September 22nd, every Thursday evening. It's fun, it's exciting, it goes really fast. So with that, again, want to thank everybody for being of this movement and for sticking with it. And let's just keep going.
Thank you, David. And I also want to mention one thing. We sent out an email, I think several weeks ago by now, but I want to remind you all, we are doing our second annual Teach the Truth Wisconsin, the second week of October 9th to 15th. We choose that week because that Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, and that Friday, October 14th, is George Floyd's birthday. So please do sign up, get your congregation to sign up to take part and to do an action on that during that week. I'm putting the web page in the chat for you all so you can take a look, see what we did last year. We had some really amazing things around the state last year. We'd love to do even more this year. Please do be in touch with one of us, me, Lisa, David, Carrie, Peter, if you have questions. Ernestine, did you want to?
Yes, one question. Will these trainings be recorded?
Normally we don't, because they're pretty interactive. And we want people to be, we want people to feel comfortable.
Okay.
To kind of say what they want to say and not think that somebody else is going to be watching. So usually we don't record the trainings.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Ernestine. Okay, Lisa, do you want to read the prayer that you shared with some of us this morning as our closing prayer?
Yeah, I'll be happy to share that. I know there's a prayer by Howard Thurman that I want to share with all of us, and just as a reminder, it's also too why this is so important. I was reading something earlier today talking about the Muskego School District, that the school board decided not to have a book talking about the internment of Japanese Americans. Of course, it will make children who are saying white children feel bad. So, and I know that there's so we talk about Teach the Truth. There's a teaching in Muskego next week, but this goes to tell you why we need to be bringing people in and where we need to be the shining light through ourselves and staying steadfast in the work. So I'm going to read this closing prayer, and it's adapted from Howard Thurman. I confess my own inner confusion as I look out upon the world. There is food for all. Many are hungry. There are clothes enough for all. Many are in rags. There is room enough for all. Many are crowded. There are none who want war. Preparations for conflict abound. Let thy light burn in me, that I may from this moment on take effective steps within my own powers to live up to the light and courageously to pay for the kind of world I so deeply desired. Have a wonderful evening, justice, equity siblings, and keep strong in the fight for justice.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.